Why did the radio hesitate before finishing the sentence? A ranger element reports a teenager is shooting. No one said it out loud, but everyone listening felt the same unease. Teenager meant mistake. It meant panic. It meant someone who didn't belong where bullets decided outcomes. 12 feet away from the radio, Sergeant First Class Mara Calder stood perfectly still. Her rifle was still warm. The spent casing lay half buried in Afghan dust, spinning slowly as if refusing to accept it was finished. The shot that saved First Sergeant Ronan Pike's life was barely seconds old. He didn't look at her. "Send her back in a body bag or send her back crying," Pike growled into the handset. "I don't care which. Just get that girl off my outpost before she gets my rangers killed." Mara heard every word. She always did. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't explain that the man who had just dismissed her wouldn't be breathing if she'd hesitated even half a second longer. Instead, she cleared her chamber, locked the bolt to the rear, and waited. Waiting had become second nature. At 26, she was the smallest soldier in Bravo Company, 5'5", 122 pounds. On paper, she looked like logistics support, supply coordination in Kuwait, clean marksmanship scores, nothing that suggested blood or distance or lives ending at 1,000 meters. The paper didn't show Chagall Valley. It didn't show the wind gusting sideways through broken stone. Didn't show a 19-year-old girl lying alone on a ridgeline, counting heartbeats while men screamed below. Didn't show a shot that still appeared in classified briefings, whispered about by instructors who pretended it never happened. The men who survived that valley stopped using her name. They called her Ghost Eye. Most assumed she was dead. Outpost Black Ridge clung to the mountains like a wound that refused to close. HESCO barriers scarred by years of fire, dust in everything. Even the air felt tired. At nearly 7,000 feet, every breath carried weight. Mara stepped off the helicopter as if she'd never left. She moved like someone returning, not arriving. Her pale eyes never stopped measuring angles, rooftops, distances. She cataloged the outpost in seconds, where fire would come from, where it would go, where people would freeze when it mattered. Captain Elias Crow met her at the landing zone. He'd expected a replacement marksman. He hadn't expected her. She nodded once when he welcomed her. No smile, no nerves, just calm. First Sergeant Pike watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw locked. He saw liability. He saw youth. He saw another name he might have to write to a family someday. He did not see 17 engagements buried under classification. He did not see precision that bordered on unnatural. Mara let him see nothing. She learned long ago that invisibility was safer than recognition. She grew up in the Appalachian hollows of West Virginia, where silence taught patience and distance taught respect. Her father had been a sniper once, until nerves in his hand failed him. He taught her to shoot before she could spell her name. "Pulling the trigger is easy," he told her once, rain soaking through both of them on a frozen ridge. "Living with it is harder." She enlisted the day after her 18th birthday. She finished schools others washed out of, passed tests designed to break people. She never bragged, never needed to. Then came Chagall Valley. The ambush, the dead sniper, the radio screaming for eyes that didn't exist anymore. She became the eyes. For nearly 3 hours she held a ridgeline alone, one shot after another. No panic, no hesitation, just math, wind, breath. 11 men died because her finger moved. She felt nothing. That was the part that scared her. The army buried the truth, reassigned her, erased her name. Then her father died. Now she was back in the mountains, carrying his journal pressed against her chest plate, feeling the familiar weight of being unseen. The testing started immediately. Worst shifts, sabotaged equipment, whispers that followed her through narrow corridors, a squad leader who smirked and asked if her daddy gave her the rifle. She answered with silence. Silence had protected her before. Only one soldier spoke to her like a human being, Akoa Daniel, a spotter who had lost his shooter weeks before she arrived. "They're trying to break you," he told her quietly one night. She didn't deny it. He told her about Harlan, about hesitation, about guilt that didn't fade, about a man who walked into the dark alone and never came back. Mara listened. Understanding settled into her bones. She didn't hate Pike anymore. She understood him. The mission came before dawn. High-value target, valley northeast of the outpost, overwatch insertion, precision required. Pike objected. Crow shut him down. Mara went anyway. She lay prone as the sun crept over stone, her father's scope pressed to her eye. The world narrowed to familiar lines. Then the enemy doubled. PKMs, RPGs, men who knew the ground. Pike's voice cut through the chaos. "We're pinned, need precision now." She didn't hesitate. 3 target, 3 calculations, 3 shots. 11 seconds. Then the flankers. Too close, too dangerous, too little time. "Hold fire," Pike ordered. Mara stayed. Her father's voice whispered through memory, "Trust the math, trust yourself." She fired. Both threats dropped. Silence returned. When Pike spoke again, the anger was gone. "Good shooting." 2 words heavy with meaning. The debrief unraveled everything. Classified files, a photograph from years ago, Chagall Valley exposed. Pike saw the truth for the first time. Not a girl. A survivor. A weapon who carried the weight without asking for praise. He apologized later quietly, without ceremony. She accepted without bitterness. Because she understood what fear did to good men. That night, Mara sat under Afghan stars with her father's journal open on her lap. She read the final entry again. Some things can't be taught, they can only be discovered. She closed the book. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't a ghost. She was a soldier who endured being doubted, being erased, being silent, until action spoke for her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier after the gunfire stopped? Mara noticed it before anyone else. That hollow pause after chaos when the mountains seemed to lean closer, listening. It was the kind of quiet that never meant safety, only patience. She stayed behind the rifle, cheek welded to stock, breathing slow, counting heartbeats long after the valley below appeared still. "Ghost Eye confirmed no further movement," Pike's voice came through the radio, clipped but different now. Less command, more uncertainty. She scanned again. Roof lines, doorways, shadows where men liked to pretend they weren't afraid. Nothing moved, but she didn't say clear yet. Experience had taught her that relief was often premature, and premature relief killed people. "Stand by," she answered, short, controlled. Beside her, Akoa watched her work without interrupting. He'd learned quickly that her silence wasn't dismissal. It was focus. The first time they'd lain prone together, he'd expected instructions, corrections, some display of dominance. Instead, she'd handed him data like a quiet gift and trusted him to do his job. Trust was rare out here. The assault element moved again below, careful now, every step deliberate. Pike's Rangers advanced through the village with the rigid precision of men who just realized how close death had come. Mara tracked them too, not because she didn't trust them, but because she couldn't afford not to. Friendly silhouettes were just as important as hostile ones, maybe more. Her finger rested outside the trigger guard, safe, waiting. Minutes stretched, wind shifted then settled, the mountains exhaled. "Overwatch we're set," Pike finally said, "moving to exfil." "Copy," Mara replied. Only then did she ease back, rolling tension out of her shoulders with careful movements. The rifle felt heavier now, not from weight but from memory. Every shot stayed with her, not as faces or names, but as moments when the world narrowed and she chose to act. Alcoa glanced at her. "You good?" She nodded once. She always nodded once. The walk back to the extraction point was quiet. No celebration, no jokes, the kind of silence that came from men replaying near misses in their heads. Mara moved at the rear, eyes scanning, mind already slipping inward. That was the danger zone. After action, after adrenaline, when thoughts crept in uninvited. She forced herself to stay present, boots on rock, breath in lungs, rifle balance just right. At the LZ, the rotors cut the air into pieces. Dust rose, stinging eyes, coating teeth. As she boarded the bird, Mara felt it again, that sense of being slightly out of step with everyone else. Like she was moving through a different rhythm, one only she could hear. Back at Outpost Black Ridge, the atmosphere had shifted. She could feel it the moment her boots hit the ground. The looks weren't the same anymore. Less dismissal, more uncertainty. A few glances held something closer to awe, though she didn't linger on them. Awe was just another way to misunderstand. She cleaned her rifle alone that night. It was ritual, comforting in its precision, every movement exact, no wasted effort. As she worked, her father's journal lay open beside her, pages fluttering slightly in the stale air. She didn't read it yet, just let it be there like a quiet witness. The knock on the door came soft. She didn't look up. "It's open." Captain Crow stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He didn't speak right away, just watched her for a moment as if confirming she was real. "You saved a lot of lives today," he said finally. She didn't respond. Crow nodded as if he'd expected that. "Battalions on the way, faster than I'd like." That made her pause. She looked up then, eyes steady. "Because of me." "Because of what someone went digging for," he corrected gently. "Not your fault." Fault was a strange word. She learned it didn't always belong where people placed it. After he left, Mara sat on her cot with the journal in her hands. She traced her father's handwriting again, letting the familiar lines ground her. She thought of Pike, of the way his voice had changed on the radio, of the fear beneath his anger. She understood fear. She lived with it since Chagall Valley. Not fear of dying, but fear of what it meant that she didn't hesitate anymore. Morning came with tension thick enough to taste. When Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez arrived, the outpost seemed to hold its breath. Mara stood where she was told, posture perfect, face unreadable. The photograph on the tablet felt like a mirror she hadn't expected to face again. Chagall Valley, her younger self, alone on the ridge. As Vasquez spoke, Mara felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Not pride, not shame, exposure, the truth laid bare after years of silence. She watched Pike as realization dawned on him, watched the armor crack. She didn't feel satisfaction, only a quiet sadness for a man who had been fighting ghosts of his own. When it was over, when Brennan was gone and the truth settled into its new shape, Mara stepped outside into the thin afternoon light. The mountains looked the same, indifferent, ancient. Pike found her later by the perimeter. "I was wrong," he said. "No excuses, no justifications." She respected that. "I wasn't trying to prove you wrong," she replied. "I was just doing my job." He nodded, hands clasped behind his back. "That's what scares me the most," he admitted. "How easy you make it look." Mara considered him. "It's not easy," she said quietly. "It's just quiet." That night she lay awake longer than usual, not from memories this time, but from something else. A fragile sense of belonging she didn't fully trust yet. Acceptance felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away. But as the generators hummed and distant laughter drifted through the outpost, she allowed herself one small, unfamiliar thought. Maybe she didn't have to disappear to survive anymore. Maybe being seen, didn't have to mean being broken. Outside, the mountains kept their watch. Inside, Ghost Eye closed her eyes, not as a weapon, not as a legend, but as a woman still learning how to carry what she'd become without losing who she was. Why did it feel harder now that everyone finally knew her name? Mara sensed it the moment she stepped into the morning air. The outpost hadn't changed, not really. Same dust, same cracked HESCO barriers, same mountains watching without judgment. But the space around her felt different, like a spotlight she'd never asked for had been switched on and forgotten. She adjusted her sling and walked anyway. Rangers nodded as she passed, some quick, some awkward, a few with respect they hadn't known how to offer before. None of it settled right in her chest. Recognition was heavier than doubt. Doubt you could endure. Recognition came with expectations. She reported to the range because that was what she did when her thoughts got loud. The first shot broke clean. The second stacked with it. The third tightened the group until it looked unreal. The rifle responded like an extension of her breath. She let herself disappear into the process, the way she always had. When she finished, someone was standing behind her. Not too close, close enough. Ronan Pike didn't speak right away. He watched the target through binoculars, jaw set, as if trying to reconcile what he saw with years of assumptions he'd built his leadership on. "Mind if I ask you something?" he said. She cleared the rifle, stood, and faced him. "You just did." That almost drew a smile from him. Almost. "How do you carry it?" he asked. "All of it." She knew what he meant. Chagall, the valley, the men who didn't come home, the weight that didn't show on paper. "I don't," she said after a moment. "I let it sit. Carrying implies moving forward with it. Some things stay where they happened." Pike absorbed that, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's not how it works for most of us." "I know," she replied. "That's why most of you break." The words weren't cruel, just honest. He exhaled slowly. "Harlan broke," he said, "and I missed it." Mara looked past him toward the mountains. "You didn't miss it," she said. "You saw it and hoped it would resolve itself. We all do that with others, with ourselves." That landed harder than accusation ever could. After he left, Mara stayed at the range until the sun climbed high enough to bleach the color from the rocks. When she finally walked back, Okoa fell into step beside her without comment. That was how he operated, presence without pressure. "They're talking," he said eventually. She shrugged. "They always are." "Different this time," he replied. "They're not deciding if you belong, they're deciding where you fit." She stopped walking. That made him stop too. "I don't need a place," she said quietly. "I need a purpose." Okoa met her eyes. "You already have one. Now you just don't have to pretend you don't." That unsettled her more than the hostility ever had. The mission tempo increased after that. Success bred demand. Intelligence flowed in faster, more Overwatch insertions, more nights on glass, more decisions measured in seconds and lives. Mara performed the same way every time. Calm, precise, unremarkable in her own mind. She didn't chase perfection. She accepted what was possible and executed within it. But something inside her began to shift. She noticed it during a long Overwatch one night, lying beside Okoa as the valley slept below them. He was whispering range estimates, voice low and steady. She found herself listening not just for data, but for the human cadence beneath it. The fact that someone trusted her enough to lie exposed beside her. Trust was new territory. Her father's words returned uninvited. Knowing when not to pull the trigger is harder. She'd always assumed that meant target identification. Now she wondered if it meant something else. The call came 3 weeks later. Not combat. A local family had approached the wire at dusk, a child injured by an unexploded munition. Panic, confusion, shouting in two languages that didn't fully meet. Mara watched from a distance at first, rifle slung, eyes assessing threat vectors out of habit. Then she saw the child. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, blood on her leg, fear eclipsing pain, her mother's hands shaking as she held her. Something inside Mara tightened. She lowered herself, slow, deliberate, hands visible. The mother flinched anyway. Mara spoke softly, not English, broken Pashto she'd learned and rarely used. Enough. The girl stared at her with wide eyes. Mara removed her glove and pressed it gently against the wound, applying pressure the way she'd done 100 times under fire. The child whimpered, then quieted. "Easy," Mara murmured. "You're okay." The words felt strange in her mouth. Later, after Medevac took the family away, Pike found her sitting alone, staring at her blood-stained glove. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she replied. "This is part of it, too." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about what comes after?" She understood the question. After the rifle, after the missions, after the quiet. "All the time," she said. "I just don't have an answer." That night, she opened her father's journal again, flipping past ballistics and wind calls until she reached a page she rarely read. It wasn't technical. It was a note. "You are not what you take, you are what you protect." She stared at the words until they blurred. The next mission tested her in ways no distance shot ever had. Intel flagged a compound believed to house a bomb maker, confirmed hostile, children possibly present. Rules tightened, lines blurred. Mara lay prone, scope trained on a doorway. A man moved inside, armed, dangerous. Behind him, a small figure crossed the room. Her breathing slowed. Her finger stayed still. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. "Oversight confirmed shot," Pike ordered softly. She could take it, she knew she could. The math worked. The risk was acceptable by doctrine. But doctrine didn't account for the way her chest felt. "Negative," she said. "Stand by." The man stepped into the open alone moments later. She fired. Clean. Afterward, no one questioned her decision. No one said anything at all. But as they extracted, Mara felt something unfamiliar settle over her. Relief. Not because she'd spared a life. Because she'd chosen. Later, alone, she acknowledged it. For the first time since Chagall Valley, she'd felt something other than precision. She wasn't broken. She was changing. The realization scared her more than any firefight. Because change meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant trusting that who she was becoming wouldn't cost someone else their life. Under the Afghan stars, Ghost Eye lay awake, wrestling with a truth she could no longer ignore. Silent resilience had carried her this far. But silence alone would not be enough to carry her forward. What happens when the weapon everyone depends on starts to remember she's human? Mara didn't sleep the night after the compound raid. Not because of the shot, she barely remembered the recoil, but because of the moment before it. The pause, the choice. It stayed with her longer than any trigger pull ever had. She lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, listening to the generators hum like distant surf. Her father's journal rested against her chest, unmoving, heavier than steel. For years, her strength had been in how little she felt. Now feeling was creeping back in, uninvited, like light through a crack she hadn't known existed. She didn't know if that made her stronger or dangerous. Morning brought another briefing, another map, another valley with lines drawn through it like fate could be planned with grease pencil. Mara took her place without comment, eyes scanning automatically, body present while her mind stayed half a step behind. Captain Crow outlined the mission. Route clearance, high probability of contact, civilian traffic expected. Civilians. The word echoed. Pike glanced at her once during the brief. Not suspicion this time. Concern. That unsettled her more than his earlier hostility ever had. Concern implied investment. Investment implied the possibility of loss. The convoy rolled out under a pale sky. Mara rode high, overwatch position in the lead vehicle, glass sweeping rooftops and ridgelines. The terrain tightened as they moved, valley walls pressing closer, funnels everywhere. It was the kind of ground that rewarded patience and punished arrogance. Her radio crackled with routine callouts. Then a shape moved where it shouldn't have. Mara's pulse didn't spike. It never did. She zoomed in, refined the image. A man near the road pretending to adjust a sandal. The posture was wrong, the stillness too deliberate. Possible trigger man, she said quietly. The convoy slowed. A child appeared from behind a wall, running toward the man, laughing, oblivious. Mara's breath caught. The man's hand twitched. Time fractured. She could take the shot, she should. The angle was clean, the risk of an IED was real. But the child was too close. A miss, a ricochet, a consequence she couldn't calculate. Hold, she said. Child in danger zone. Pike didn't argue, he trusted her now. The child reached the man, tugged at his clothing. The man hesitated. That hesitation saved him. He stepped back, melted into the crowd as villagers emerged, curiosity breaking the moment like a wave. The convoy passed without incident. No one said anything. Back at the outpost, Mara sat alone, hands clasped, staring at nothing. She'd broken pattern, not by firing but by not firing. Her father's warning surfaced again. The day you stop feeling it is the day you need to worry. She felt everything now. That evening, Akoa found her at the edge of the perimeter. The sun was setting, bleeding color into the mountains. You good? He asked. She considered lying. She'd been good at that once. I don't know, she said instead. He nodded. That's allowed, you know. She huffed a quiet breath. Not out here. Especially out here, he corrected. They stood in silence for a while. Do you ever think about Harlan? She asked. Every day, he said. I think about what he couldn't live with and what I still have to. She absorbed that. I don't want to become him. Akoa met her eyes. You won't. He hesitated because he was afraid of being wrong. You hesitate because you're afraid of being right. The distinction settled deep. The next mission came too soon. Night insertion, compound on a ridgeline. Intelligence said leadership meeting, low collateral tolerance. Mara took her position as the assault element moved below her like shadows. She tracked entrances, exits, secondary positions. Her breathing slowed. Her world narrowed. A figure stepped into her scope, male, armed, talking animatedly to another inside the compound. Then a third shape, smaller, younger. Her throat tightened. She waited. Minutes dragged. The smaller figure left, a teenager, not a child, not a fighter. The man followed. Mara fired. Clean, necessary, controlled. The mission succeeded. Back at Black Ridge, Pike called her into his office, not for reprimand, for something else. You're changing, he said bluntly. So are you, she replied. That earned a tired smile. Fair. He leaned back. I used to think the best soldiers were the ones who felt nothing. Turns out they're the ones who feel and still act. She didn't answer. You're not losing your edge, Pike continued. You're sharpening it. She wasn't sure she believed him, but she wanted to. That night she opened her father's journal and wrote something new for the first time. Not data, not math. Just a sentence. I remembered today. She closed the book. Outside, distant gunfire echoed through the valleys. Someone else's fight, someone else's fear. Mara lay back, eyes open, heart unsteady in a way it hadn't been for years. She was still ghost-eye. But she was no longer just a ghost. And the hardest battles ahead would not be fought at distance, through glass and wind, but inside the quiet space where duty and humanity collided. She didn't know yet how to win those. Only that she would have to try. What happens when the mission ends, but the reckoning doesn't? Mara felt it before the orders came down. That subtle shift in tempo, the way conversations shortened, the way the air itself seemed to brace. Experience told her something was coming that wouldn't fit neatly into an after-action report. She was on Overwatch again, same ridge, different valley. Dawn crept in low and colorless, washing the world in gray. Her rifle lay steady beneath her, scope clear, mind quieter than it had been in weeks. Not empty, quiet in a way that suggested acceptance. The radio cracked. High-value movement confirmed. She didn't respond right away. She was already tracking. The target was older than most. He moved carefully, not with the arrogance of someone who thought himself untouchable, but with the wariness of a man who'd survived long enough to understand probability. He paused often, listened, waited for the world to reveal itself before stepping forward. Mara respected that. The assault element maneuvered below. Pike's voice came through, steady, professional. He trusted her now without needing to hear her name on the radio every 30 seconds. That trust felt heavier than responsibility. She lined up the shot. Then she saw what intelligence hadn't flagged. A limp, subtle but real. A man who couldn't run fast, couldn't escape if things went wrong, couldn't react the way doctrine assumed. Her breath slowed anyway. She didn't fire. "Hold," she said. Pike hesitated. "Confirm." "Target compromised," she replied, reassessing. Seconds stretched. The man turned, spoke to someone behind him. A woman stepped into view, older, weathered, unarmed. She handed him something small, food maybe, or medicine. A human moment, intruding where it didn't belong. Mara swallowed. "Adjust plan," she said quietly. "Recommend capture." Silence followed. The kind that meant command was weighing cost against conscience. "Approved," Pike said finally. "Stand by." The capture went clean. No shots fired, no casualties. Back at Black Ridge, no one congratulated her. They didn't need to. Something had changed again, not just in how they saw her, but in how she saw herself. That afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez called her in alone. "You're at a crossroads," the colonel said plainly. "Your record is complicated, your performance is not." Mara listened. "You can continue exactly as you are," Vasquez continued. "Or you can step into something larger, instructor track, advisory roles, leadership." Mara felt an unexpected resistance rise in her chest. "I'm not done here," she said. Vasquez studied her for a long moment. "You will be," she said, "sooner than you think. The question is whether you leave as a ghost or as a guide." That word stayed with her. Guide. That night Mara sat with Akoa on the sandbag wall, stars sharp overhead. "They want to move me," she said. "Eventually," he replied, "they move everyone." "I don't know who I am without the rifle," she admitted. Akoa considered that. "You're the one who taught me that the rifle is just a tool." She almost laughed, almost. Later, alone, she opened her father's journal again. She flipped past familiar pages until she reached the back, blank space he'd never filled. She wrote carefully. "I thought distance kept me safe. I was wrong. What keeps me whole is knowing why I choose." She closed the book, pressing it to her chest like she always had. The next mission was the hardest yet. Not because of enemy fire. Because of aftermath. An IED struck a patrol from another company. 2 KIA, 1 critically wounded. Mara arrived late, providing overwatch during casualty extraction. She watched medics work, hands slick with blood, voices tight with urgency. She saw herself reflected in their movements, precision, focus, compartmentalization. But when the helicopter lifted away, leaving silence and scattered debris behind, something in her cracked. She walked a short distance away and sat down hard, rifle across her knees. Her hands shook. Not fear. Grief. Pike found her there. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said quietly. "I always have," she replied. He sat beside her anyway. "You don't have to anymore," he said. That was the moment she understood what had been changing all along. Not her aim. Her isolation. Weeks later, as rotation orders circulated, Mara stood on the same ridge where she'd first proven herself to Bravo Company. The valley below looked no different than it ever had. But she wasn't just Ghost Eye anymore. She was someone others watched to learn when to act, and when not to. When the orders came, she didn't resist. Instructor assignment. Limited time on the line. More time teaching others how to survive with their humanity intact. She didn't know if she was ready. But she knew she was willing. As she packed her gear that night, Mara paused, journal in hand. She added one final line for now. Strength isn't silence. It's knowing when to speak and when to stay. Outside, the mountain stood unmoved. Inside, a woman who had once believed she was only a weapon prepared to become something else. Not because the war had ended, but because she had finally begun to live with it. Why did the mountains feel quieter on the morning she was supposed to leave? Mara noticed it as soon as the sun crept over the ridgeline. The light didn't feel different. The air didn't feel lighter, but something inside her had settled into a shape she didn't recognize at first. Not peace, not relief. Completion. She stood near the perimeter with her rucksack at her feet, rifle slung across her chest the way it always was. The outpost was waking up slowly. Boots on gravel, distant laughter, the ordinary sounds of people continuing on without ceremony. That, she realized, was the point. For most of her career, departures had felt like escapes. Leave before anyone asked too many questions. Leave before attachment formed. Leave before someone noticed that beneath the precision and calm lived a woman who didn't know how to explain what she carried. This time felt different. This time she was leaving something behind, but she wasn't running from it. Alcoa was the first to find her. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the Hesco barrier beside her, eyes on the horizon. "You're going to be unbearable as an instructor," he said finally. She exhaled a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "You'll miss me." "I'll miss having someone who sees the thing I don't," he admitted. "But I won't miss pretending you're not human." She nodded. That mattered more than he knew. Captain Crow came next. A firm handshake. No speech. Just a look that said he trusted what she'd become, even if he didn't fully understand it. Then Pike. He approached slower than the others, hands clasped behind his back the way he did when he was thinking too much. "I've been doing this a long time," he said. "I thought leadership meant never letting your people see doubt." Mara waited. "I was wrong," he continued. "They don't need certainty. They need honesty. You taught me that without ever trying to." She met his gaze. "You taught me that strength doesn't have to be loud." They stood there for a moment, two soldiers who had misjudged each other and lived long enough to correct it. The helicopter arrived with its usual violence, rotors shredding the air, dust rising in angry spirals. As Mara climbed aboard, she looked back at Outpost Black Ridge one last time. It looked smaller than it had when she arrived. Not because it mattered less. Because she had grown. As the aircraft lifted away, the mountains unfolded beneath her, ancient and indifferent as ever. She watched valleys slide past, each one holding stories no one would ever fully tell. She knew she carried some of them with her now, not as ghosts but as lessons. Fort Moore felt unreal after Afghanistan. Too green, too ordered, too loud in ways that didn't mean danger. She reported in, completed the formalities, and was assigned a small office with a battered desk and a whiteboard that still bore half-erased range calculations from someone who'd been there before. Instructor. The word still sat strangely in her chest. Her first class was small, a mix of young soldiers and seasoned ones, all watching her with different expectations. Some curious, some skeptical, a few already convinced she was something she was. She didn't start with her record. She didn't mention distances or kills or classified valleys. She asked a question instead. When was the last time you didn't take a shot and lived with it? The room went quiet. Good, she thought. Quiet meant listening. Over the weeks that followed, Mara taught them the math, the wind, the discipline, but she also taught them something harder. She taught them to wait, to question certainty, to understand that restraint was not weakness, and that precision meant more than accuracy. Some resisted. Some leaned in. She learned which ones needed time, and which ones needed to be told the truth without padding. At night, alone in her quarters, she still opened her father's journal. She added to it now, not often, only when something mattered. One evening, months later, she paused over a blank page longer than usual. She wrote, "I used to think my value was measured in distance. Now I know it's measured in what I leave intact." She closed the book gently. On a quiet weekend, she visited her father's old shop. It smelled the same, oil, metal, wood. The bench was exactly as she remembered it. She ran her fingers along the worn surface, imagining his hands there, steady and patient. "I figured it out," she said softly to the empty room. "Not all of it, but enough." The shop didn't answer. It didn't need to. Years later, long after Outpost Black Ridge had faded into memory for most, a young soldier would ask about the tattoo on her wrist, the arrow, the 11 marks. Mara would roll her sleeve down gently. "Some things aren't stories," she would say. "They're reminders." She never told them about Chagall Valley unless they needed to know. Never used the name Ghost Eye unless someone else did first. Because legends were easy. Living with truth was harder. And she had learned, through doubt, resistance, silence, and choice, that dignity didn't come from being seen as extraordinary. It came from doing what was necessary, then staying human afterward. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes resilience doesn't roar. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.